Hello everyone, good afternoon. In this session, we are going to discuss about instruments and types of fiscal policy. So what is fiscal policy? Is the policy of the government of making discretionary changes in the pattern and level of its expenditure, taxation and borrowings in order to achieve certain economic goals such as economic growth, employment, income, equality and stabilization of the economy on a growth path. And to achieve these objectives of like increase in national income, increase in the growth rate of the economy, reducing the inequality of income or increasing the employment opportunities for the public, there are different instruments of fiscal policy which government can use to achieve these targets of the policy. Now, what are the different instruments? The different instruments are like budget, taxation, public expenditure, public debt, and various instruments mainly in this covers like taxation. Taxation is the main instrument in the hands of the government through which they mobilizes the funds and through which they achieve their targets. Now, how taxation help in achieving the targets? You know that there are two types of taxes that government can impose. One is the direct tax and the other is the indirect tax. If we take the example of direct tax, like income tax is one of the best example of direct tax. How government can utilize these instruments of direct tax to control the money supply in the economy, and by controlling money supply, how they control other variables in the economy. Like suppose if government increases the direct tax rate. Now if government increases the direct tax rate, the first effect will be on the disposable income, because increase in the direct tax rate will lead to reduction in the disposable income, because any person, those who are earning that level of income, has to pay now more tax. Now if disposable income goes down, then the money in the hands of the person will be less, and less amount of money now they can spend on buying or purchasing of products. So therefore, fall in the disposable income will lead to fall in the purchasing power, and that further leads to the fall in the demand of the products in the economy. Now if demand goes down, then obviously overall if we interact like intersection of demand and supply we see, then fall in demand will lead to the fall in the price of the commodity. And if price goes down, the business becomes not more profitable for any investor. Their profits goes down, or maybe they may incur loss, and in that case the investments will go down. Okay, so that is the overall impact, and therefore like they can control inflation if there is in the economy, and the objective is to control inflation. Similarly, indirect taxes can be increased or decreased depending upon the situation in the economy. So if there is recession and if they want to increase the demand, then they will reduce the direct tax rate. If there is inflation in the economy, they want to control prices, then they may increase the direct tax rate. So this is how this instrument of taxation affects and the different variables, and how it is used as an instrument of fiscal policy. Now another instrument is public expenditure. Okay, like government may increase their expenditure, may reduce their expenditure depending upon the situation, depending upon objective preferences of the government during that time. Like now if we see at present in the Indian economy situation, like government needs to target the growth rate. They also are increasing their expenditure because they want to generate more employment. Due to COVID, that there was inverse impact on the income level of the public. So therefore, government expenditure is increasing. Okay, and increase in the government expenditure will also help in further growth of the economy, because infrastructure development will be there. Increase in the government expenditure will lead to increase in the money supply, which in turn will increase in the purchasing power of the public. Demand will increase, investment will increase, and that will help increase in the growth rate of the economy. Another instrument is public debt. That means the government borrowing. Now government borrowing depends, like what is the situation, like whether they should increase the government borrowing, they should decrease the government borrowing, and if there is a deficit budget, and if they are using expansionary policy, then in that case public borrowing may be more, external borrowing may be more, because internal borrowing, if they increases, then that will lead to contractionary policy, because that will lead to fall in the money supply in the economy. So therefore, different instruments are there, and these are the basic instruments of fiscal policy which they utilize, to achieve the targets or to achieve their goals of the policy. Now, fiscal levers, spending and taxation. Spending and taxation, are two levers available to the government for setting fiscal policies, as we have discussed. So increase in spending and tax cuts will increase aggregate demand if we see through the aggregate demand, but the extent of the increase depends on the spending and tax multipliers, because multiplier also takes place there, as we have discussed that there will be investment multiplier, there will be income multiplier. Okay, so government spending multiplier is the number that indicates how much change in aggregate demand would result from a given change in the spending. So tax multiplier is again is the magnification effect, okay, of a change in taxes on aggregate demand. Tax multiplier is smaller than the spending multiplier, as when the government purchases something, the full amount of the change in expenditure to the to be applied to aggregate demand. When the government cuts taxes, there is an increase in disposable income, as I have already taken as an example, and part of which will be spent, but part of it will be saved. So the money that is saved does not contribute to the multiplier effect. So if we see the tax multiplier and government spending multiplier, you can see that government expenditure multiplier will, depending upon the MPS and MPC, so it will be like 1 upon 1 minus MPC. So more the marginal propensity to consume, more will be the multiplier, higher will be the multiplier. And tax multiplier, if we see, then MPC upon 1 minus MPC. So that means B upon 1 minus B, that is that will be the tax multiplier. So if there is a change in the tax rate, how much multiple effect will be there on the economy, that we can see through this formula. Now fiscal multiplier example, you can see from the picture that the money spent on construction of a plant becomes wages to builders, and the builders will have more disposable income, increasing their consumption and aggregate demand. Now if we talk about different kinds of fiscal policy, then there is no unique fiscal policy that can provide appropriate solution to all kinds of economic problems, and under different condition in different countries and at different point of time. So in fact, different kinds of fiscal policies have been suggested by the economists and used by the policy makers in different countries under different economic condition to achieve their macroeconomic targets. Now if we talk about classification of fiscal policy, then basically we can have three, like one is automatic stabilization fiscal policy, another is compensatory fiscal policy, and the third is discretionary fiscal policy. Now this classification of fiscal policy is based on the frequency and purpose of changes made in the revenue and expenditure programs by the government of different countries. So the frequency of fiscal changes may vary from country to country and from time to time. The fiscal changes may be made like once for all, or made once a year, or made more frequently within a year, as it happens like in India in the case of Indian economy. So the working of the different kinds of fiscal policies are discussed like suppose for example, if we talk about automatic stabilization policy, first type of fiscal policy. The automatic fiscal policy means adopting a fiscal system with built-in flexibility of tax, revenue and government spending. Now built-in flexibility means that there is automatic adjustment in the government expenditure and tax revenue in response to rise and fall in GDP. Now, in this kind of fiscal policy, the tax system and expenditure program are so linked to GDP and unemployment that tax revenue and public expenditure change automatically with change in GDP and unemployment. So, the fiscal policy is so formulated that with increase in GDP, tax revenue increases and government expenditure decreases automatically. Tax revenue increases because household income will increase with increase in GDP. Likewise, tax revenue decreases and government expenditure increases automatically with decrease in GDP and increase in unemployment. So, this kind of taxation system, halts decrease in private aggregate demand by way of lowering, taxation, and adds to the aggregate demand by increasing government expenditure. And this prevents the economy going into Great Depression. Now, second is compensatory fiscal policy. So, another variant of stabilizing policy is compensatory fiscal policy. The compensatory fiscal policy is a deliberate budgetary action taken by the government to compensate for the deficiency in and to reduce excess of aggregate demand. The compensatory action is taken by the government in the form of surplus budget or deficit budget. In this kind of fiscal policy, the government uses a greater degree of discretion than in automatic stabilization policy, and compensatory fiscal policy can be revised from time to time as per the need of the country. Now, besides, the policy of surplus budgeting is adopted when the government is required to control inflation, and policy of deficit budgeting is adopted when objective is to control deflation in the economy. So, the policy of deficit budgeting is adopted to fight depression in the economy. Now, during the period of Great Depression 1929-30, the government is required to boost up the aggregate demand, especially when the economy is facing depression due to lack of effective demand. The government in this case is required to take compensatory fiscal policy measure, and the compensatory measures may be in the form of tax reduction or may be in terms of increasing the government expenditure. So, this kind of fiscal measure increases aggregate demand, and increase in aggregate demand leads first to the rise in the price level, and it adds to the producer's profit, as we have discussed, because increase in demand will lead to increase in price, and which will lead to increase in the profit of businessmen. So, this increase in profits creates an optimistic environment, and therefore both opportunity and incentive to invest increases, and this is supposed to push up the level of employment and output. And this is the kind of fiscal policy that most countries affected by the recent global recession has adopted. Another type is the discretionary fiscal policy, and this is the policy in which ad hoc changes are made in the government expenditure and taxation system, and tax rates at the discretion of the government as and when required by the economy. Now, in discretionary fiscal policy, the government makes deliberate changes. First, like in the level and pattern of taxation, or the size and pattern of its expenditure, and also the size and composition of public debt. So, the discretionary changes in these fiscal instruments are made with a view to achieving certain specific objectives. Now, how this fiscal policy can impact GDP? Expansionary fiscal policy can impact GDP through the fiscal multiplier. The fiscal multiplier is the ratio of change in the national income to the change in government spending that causes this change. So, the multiplier effect arises when government spending leads to increased income and consumption, increase in income and further increase in consumption, resulting in the increase in the national income. Because how multiplier effect works, let me just explain you in simple words. Like if government expenditure increases, then that will lead to increase in the income of the public, because people will get employment. Okay, so they can generate more income and therefore income increases. Now, if income of a person increases, then obviously their consumption will increase, And if consumption increases, then the income of the people from where we are demanding those goods will increase, because consumption of one is the income of the other. Okay, and that will lead to further result in the increase in the investment and increase in the national income. So, in other words, an initial change in aggregate demand may cause a change in aggregate output, and hence the aggregate income that it generates. That is the multiple of initial change. Okay, now post independence India's fiscal policy. Now post independence, with the gradual abatement of political and economic uncertainty, accelerating growth was one of the primary objective of the fiscal policy post independence. Now in the then nascent economy, where the income levels and financial savings were low, the fiscal policies assumed the responsibility of creating the capital base in the form of infrastructure to stimulate growth, because growth of infrastructure was the first and foremost important thing at that time of the government. And therefore India embarked on a planning process, okay, since 1950, which assigned a large role of the government, public sector and taxation, that was made the mainstay of public finance. And this you can see, the Times of India newspaper of 15th August 1947. Okay, this is the snapshot of the Times of India newspaper front page of 15th August 1947. Now 5-year fiscal policies of India, if we go back and if we see, then from 1947 to 2017, the Indian economy was premised on the concept of planning, and this was carried through the 5-year plans developed, executed and monitored by the Planning Commission, okay, 1951 to 14, and the Niti Aayog after that, because the Planning Commission was changed the name as the Niti Aayog since 2015. Now India launched its first 5-year plan in 1951, immediately after independence, under the socialist influence of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. And the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003, which is like FRBMA, is an act of the Parliament of India to reduce India's fiscal deficit, improve macroeconomic management and the overall management of the public funds by moving towards a balanced budget. Now, what was the main objective of this act? The main purpose was to eliminate, revenue deficit of the country. That means like by building revenue surplus thereafter, and bring down the fiscal deficit to a manageable percentage. Now, Government of India's fiscal policy of 2022, recent policy if we see, then startups in agriculture and rural enterprises to receive finance through NABARD for the farm produce value chain. Okay, because government wants to motivate agriculture sector. Okay, but even after the second 5-year plan, which was based on Mahal-Nobis model, because agricultural cannot be developed, without the development of the industry. So therefore, this both has to go hand in hand, because development of agriculture depends upon the development of the industry. So National Skill Qualification Framework, NSQF, was set up to clear to dynamic industry needs also in this policy of 2022. Private sector encouraged to design and develop military platforms and equipments through SPV model with DRDO. Program to rate MSMEs costing rupees 6,000 crore to be rolled out over the next 5 years. That is the recent policy of Government of India 2022, and you can see this picture of our Finance Minister Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman with this year's budget. And that this year's budget is also the growth budget, where the target is to achieve the growth rate of more than 9% for the financial year this 22-23. But fiscal policy, even though uh, government uses various instruments for the growth of the economy, and but this policy may be politically motivated and not in the best interest of the members of the economy. But when the government uses a mix of expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy, a conflict of objectives can occur, affecting the overall efficiency of the economy. Now, suppose for example, if we say, suppose if the primary objective of the government is to control inflation. Now, how the conflict of objective arises? Because to control inflation, government needs to use contractionary fiscal policy, government needs to increase government expenditure, okay, or they will use other instruments to control inflation. But if they try to control inflation, that means they try to reduce the money supply from the economy, they will reduce the demand, and because through demand they control the prices. In that situation, in controlling inflation, there are side effects in the economy, because that will lead to decrease in the investment, because if prices goes down, then obviously the investors will feel demotivated, their profits will go down, and the investment overall will go down. And if investments goes down, then the level of employment in the economy will go down, the problem of unemployment will increase, okay, and that may lead to increase in the corruption, crimes in the economy, because if there is more unemployment, level of income goes down, and which may lead to increase in the crimes in the economy. So therefore, there is a conflict of objective here, because if they try to control inflation, that will have negative impact on the level of employment, or also on the level of income. So they will have to use policy mix. So only one fiscal policy or one instrument will not help. So they will have to use make use of monetary policy, they will have to make use of other instruments also, they will have to have more strategies to control this, so that the side effects of controlling inflation can be controlled by other policies and other instruments in the economy. So there are conflictory effects, and therefore only one policy will not help. Then there are inflexibility and delays in the implementation of fiscal policies, because some proposed measures may have to go through long legislative process, okay, because government are sometimes inflexibilities are there, long processes are there, and therefore there are delay in implementation. And if there are delay in implementation, then the effect of that change, effect of that instrument will not be much in the economy. So we can say that fiscal policy encompasses two separate but related decisions. First is the public expenditure and the level and the structure of taxes. So it occupies the central place for maintaining full employment, okay, without inflationary forces in the economy, okay, but for maintaining full employment without inflationary, as we have discussed, that they will have to have other policies also simultaneously in the economy. Now, if we see this budget and government policies, and you know that there are various policies, various employment schemes that government have, okay, to generate employment. They are promoting self-employment through MSME. They are giving various benefits, okay, to the small investors. Various credit facilities are given to the small investors. So these are all. Then government is also giving subsidies, okay, for the welfare of the people, subsidies on the basic necessities they are giving. They are also giving tax exemption, okay, to those industries which are producing the basic necessity items. Also, those industries which are required, for the promotion of exports, they are giving them subsidies so that they can make more investment. Even to control regional imbalance also, government are adopting different policies so that they can have, balanced growth of different areas, different regions of the economy, because imbalance growth also hampers, because one area will be overpopulated, the other will be, density of population will be less, and those who are overpopulated, then there will be negative effect on the economy again. Okay, so therefore there are various policies, various instruments that Indian government is using time to time, okay, to control these problems of the economy. And now government is also emphasizing on skill development. Okay, skill development ministry, they are taking care, even the government is using different statutory bodies like AICT, UGC, and they are emphasizing on skill development. Why they are emphasizing on this skill development, like new education policy of the government, they are also emphasizing on this skill development, because if we are giving skilled education, if people are skilled, if students who are the future of the country, if they are skilled, then they will become employable, they can start their own startups, they can start their own business, and therefore that will help in controlling the problem of unemployment, and that will also lead to increase in the national income of the country, because if they will be better placed, because at present the problem that we are facing is the crowd of unemployed graduates, unemployed educated people. So to resolve all these issues, other than these instruments, government are using other strategies, other policies, so that they can generate employment, they can make people employable, and so that will help in generating national income, that will help in achieving growth rate. So with this various instruments, it influences the economic stability of the economy. The fiscal policy of Indian government has been very successful in several fields, such as mobilization of resources for economic development, increasing rate of savings and capital formation, developing cottage and small scale industries, reducing the incidence of poverty, etc. Now, fiscal policy is one of the important tools that an economy uses to maintain stability. But fiscal policy alone is not enough. Equally effective monetary policy has to be in place to get the maximum out of the economy. And proper administration, along with the right minds at the authority, economy of any country can prosper. So thank you so much for patience listening to this session. So thank you.